Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and I try to bring you the best guests, the most interesting guests, the guests who can talk ideas. And today's guest is perfectly equipped to do just that. His bio on X said that he's read Das Kapital 3 times. Oh, my Lord, God bless you. And then he ran into Ayn Rand. He's an academic. He's a fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm going to butcher his last name, but I'm going to try anyways. Nikos Sotirakopoulos, welcome to the program.
Excellent. Thank you. And you did a good work with the surname.
The surname. All right. Now, everyone that I talk to, and by everyone I mean Jim Valiant, tells me that I have got to talk to you about your life story, that you've just got an amazing, amazing story. So that's wonderful. So I'd love to hear it. So where'd you grow up? That, I guess, is the first thing.
Well, I grew up in Greece. And for people to get what Greece means, right? So Greece, I would say, is one of the most left-leaning countries in Europe. When it comes to the culture, the left has or at least had, I think it still has, almost perfect domination in the culture. So growing up in Greece means that you grow up with the legends of the Greek resistance to the Nazis. And who runs this resistance? Of course, the communists. You grow up with stories about resistance to the military dictatorship in the late 60s, early 70s. And who were the protagonists of this? Of course, the leftists. And actually, my parents were active in the resistance. My mother was active in the communist movement. So I grew up with this idea that to be a person who does heroic deeds, either you were an ancient Greek, like the Leonidas in Thermopylae, or you were one of the Greeks who fought the Ottomans in the 19th century, or the most recent example of resistance, of heroism, are the leftists. And growing up a bit more, I realized the second thing, that the leftists are not only the most heroic ones, are also the only ones interested in culture. So all are great poets, are great composers. Either they were leftists or they would pay homage to being a leftist as, you know, these are good people, these are people of the mind, these are people of values. So in my mind, growing up, being cultured means being a leftist.
So what is the school system like? Over here, we have, you know, K through 12 is regular school and then college. What's the school system in Greece?
Well, in Greece, whether you go to a private school or a public school, the curriculum is the same. So you have 6 and 6, 12 years of obligatory, let's say, education, more or less.
And were you always interested in education, even as a kid?
Yeah, I was, but in a good way. So I was lucky enough. My grandmother was a teacher, so she taught me to read very early. She was a conservative, and she inspired in me the appreciation for heroic deeds. So she would read me stories from the Greek Revolution or from ancient Greeks, and she would give me my first glimpses of what, let's say, a virtuous man does, which is do things that are, impressive, and the 300 in Thermopylae and things like that. And also a bit tribalism, that always the Greeks, we are the few fighting against the many, and whether we win or we lose, we stand our ground, and we never give up.
So was Alexander the Great Greek or Macedonian? What is there a difference there? What's happening?
This is like you're asking me, is someone from North Dakota or from the United States? Look, there's no question that Alexander was part of ancient Greek, the Greek tradition, the Greek culture. Macedonia was part of Greece. Now, some people might tell you otherwise, but these people need to check their history.
Okay, they need to check their history.
Yeah.
So growing up, what do you do for fun in Greece? Like over here, we used to play like baseball and football when we were kids. What do you do when you were in Greece growing up?
Basketball. Basketball was
Really?
the national sport. Not necessarily the most popular, because football was more popular, but we had big success. We are actually almost a global power in basketball. And basketball was very important for me because, number one, it showed me my limitations, but that needs some follow-up later. But also, through basketball, I saw modern-day heroes, people who would decline to give up, people who would fight till the end. So basketball for me, I was always very, very invested and emotionally invested. And actually, if people were not so much emotionally invested, I would look at them like, what is wrong with them? Not in a tribalist way, but in a way that, this we are seeing brilliant deeds in front of our eyes. How can you not get moved by that? And unfortunately, I was supporting teams that were always losing, so it also created some malevolent universe premise in me. But to explain this to you, you'd have to have deep knowledge of Greek sports, so I'll skip that.
All right, so you make it through your elementary school. Did you go to college? Obviously, you went to college, right?
Yes, I go to college a few weeks after 9/11, actually. So in Greece, high school, after high school, you go to, I guess, what you people would call university. So I go to university after 9/11, and the university obviously is also very much dominated by the left. So I have a good degree in politics and IR. I had a good balance of professors throughout the intellectual spectrum. Of course, in Greece, when you talk about throughout the intellectual spectrum, you talk about statists of the left and statists of the right. That's the spectrum. And some anarchists or some far leftists or some nationalists. So that's the spectrum. So I go through the university. I'm not very intellectually serious, so I'm a tribalist. By that point, I decided I'm a leftist. More than a leftist, perhaps I was anti-Western, so anti-Western values, anti-American to the point where it's embarrassing. So I was, you see these days these people with Hamas, the Hamas apologists. I was the equivalent of that around that time. Whoever was against the West, the Afghans, Saddam Hussein, anything, I was like, anything but the West is good. And that was my university years. I was invested in all this, but not very serious on this. And last year of the university, I joined the youth of the Greek Communist Party. Then I had to become a bit more disciplined in my views. So in a way, you could say the Communist Party is a bit, and I know this might be very controversial, so don't take it the wrong way. Being in the Communist Party versus being in the left in general, think about it a bit like, are you an objectivist versus you are a quote libertarian, right? So,
okay.
So in the one, this is not an issue of which is good and which is bad. This is just what intellectual discipline it requires. And being a Marxist Leninist, being in the Communist Party required some discipline, intellectual discipline that the rest of and actually not even intellectual, also political and physical discipline, I would say, that the rest of the left did not necessarily require. So then I get in a period of some years where, I'm a bit more, quote, serious in my politics. And that's the university years.
So when you're comparing it to the objectivist libertarian dynamic in America, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Marxism is an integrated philosophy.
You got it exactly.
Yeah, right. Like it requires study, understanding labor theory of value, exploitation, surplus value, all that. The army of the unemployed or whatever he called it.
Yeah, the reverse army. Yeah, you got it exactly, I think.
Yeah, whereas, your average leftist might just be bitching about the way things are and wants more welfare, that sort of thing. And over here, objectivism, we start with metaphysics. Libertarians, they start with politics.
Yeah, something like that. And also the issue of judgment. Who do we hang out with? Who do we cooperate with? Who do we, to use a term that I don't like because I never like using like quote party language, but like whatever, you will get it. Like who do we sanction, right? Who do we approve as allies and who not? So the Communist Party wasn't a school, let's say, in intellectual discipline. But again, seeing it in retrospect, I'm not proud of these years because of the person I was. I was 100% a second-hander. I don't think I had a single idea that was truly mine. Or not, forget ideas. I didn't have a single value that was truly mine. For example, the way I would, what I would do in my free time, what films I would watch. I was watching films like, European high culture cinema, and I was like, oh, I'm watching something brilliant. I had zero idea what I was watching, but I knew that this film, I had to like it because all of my comrades like it. And therefore, I was like, oh, this was like a miracle of great art. And I was basically falling asleep. So my political choices were very much close to the type of person which I was, which is not a person to be proud of.
You said something a second ago, so I'm going to take us a little off track for a minute because it really interested me. Before saying sanction, you said you don't like to use party language. I think I know what you mean, and if I'm wrong, you just tell me. It absolutely drives me up a goddamn wall when I'll ask a question on social media where I'm asking people to tell me their view, and they'll immediately come back and say, Ayn Rand said, and then they will give me a quote from Ayn Rand. And it's just like, look, I know what Ayn Rand said. I want to know what you think, right? So I'm not big on, sometimes you can't avoid it when you're talking. So you had to use sanction just now. I get, because you wanted me to understand the term. But is that what you meant, that you like to put things in your own way of thinking? You can be an objectivist and still speak with your own voice, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what, and I do it for two reasons. The number one is, if your own voice makes more sense to you, that's what you should do. You shouldn't think, oh, what did this other person say? And the other reason, which is very, very practical, so to speak, is I think it makes more sense to people. So quite often, particularly when I give talks to young people, if you use the term values, now, if you read Ayn Rand and you understand what she means by values, this is very powerful and very telling. But if I start talking about values to people who have never heard before, it's like, what exactly does this mean? So I prefer using terms like goals, dreams, your visions, so that it makes more sense to them. And also, it's a good exercise for me, which is, do I really understand what this term means? And a way to test if I understand it is, can I use different terms to convey the same meaning?
All right. So you just said that you didn't like the person that you were. Now that entails, as you said, values. You're making a value judgment, but it's a post hoc judgment. You're looking back and saying, I don't like this person. But obviously, to become that person, you had to have values to begin with. What was the morality or the ethics that you were taught or that you adopted growing up that got you to that point where you were the person that now you no longer like?
Yeah, the default. Everything was the default. So the default that you hear from religion and the default that you hear from the left. And, very often we say that socialism borrows its morality from religion, and it's just true. In both cases, it is what can you do for others? How can you sacrifice for others? And again, even today in my objectivist years, I actually enjoy helping people I appreciate. So there's nothing wrong with that. But back in the way, it was completely out of context. It was as if I have a duty for that. And the second way that this morality impacted me is, if you don't achieve anything in life, that's okay. Like, if your life sucks and if you're a bit of a loser, that's okay, because that makes you more virtuous in the eyes of God or whatever. And now I recognize this as poison. If your life is not going anywhere, you should try to figure out, why is this the case? Why is my life not going anywhere? Not try to make it as something virtuous. And that's I think the biggest harm that my ideas inflicted in me. It was me being okay with a life that wasn't good and fighting comfort in that rather than trying to change it.
Now, how long were you at the university for? How long were you in college?
I finished very quick. So in Greece, you can retake courses, you can retake modules and exams as many times. So quite often people study for years and years, but I finished in 4 years, which is the minimum, plus 1 term where I had to redo a couple of courses. So I finished very quickly, and then I moved to the UK. And I moved to the UK to something like postgrad studies, to cut a long story short. Then, so something interesting happens. I mostly lose contact with the Communist Party. So I lose, let's say, the intellectual discipline that I was following bad ideas, at least though within a particular frame. And now I was like a free range. Again, any horrible idea is can go. So then at some point I was into, I don't know, weird thing like left-wing anarchism, environmentalism, like anything goes. As long as it was anti-capitalist, big tent. Everyone, no matter how deranged you are, you're a terrorist, a pacifist, everyone under the same tent.
Queers for Palestine.
Sorry?
Queers for Palestine.
Queers for Palestine. Yeah, why not? Why not? We're all friends. We're all friends here. What actually changed me, and what was the starting of a change, was my experience in the Greek army. So in between, I have to return to Greece for 1 year. I go to the army. The army was not something special, but then within the army, I joined a special corps. I joined the Presidential Guard. And I'm not saying this to show off, because I was very bad at it. So I wasn't good at it. And actually, at some point, I tried to use some connections to actually take me out of the special corps and put me back to the regular army. Thank God it didn't work. So I had to stay to the Presidential Guard for my full service. And this was the best thing that ever happened to me, particularly at that point, because it was the first time that I was in an environment that had some expectations of me, that you have to do things, you have to take what they say extreme ownership. Like it was an environment where no excuse would fly. There were actually, the more excuses you would give, the more severe you'd be punished, for example. So it taught me some things, but mostly taught me pride, that because when this was done, I was proud that I finished it. Again, this is not to brag. I was perhaps on the 5 percentile of the worst people there. Like I wasn't a model.
Why do you emphasize that you're not trying to brag? But it's something you should be proud of. I don't care if you were in the bottom, whatever. You're part of an elite military unit. That's something to be proud of.
Yeah, first of all, it's not that we were taught like guerrilla warfare. The Presidential Guard in Greece is mostly like a ceremonial corps. But the amount of discipline and the amount of like physical training and all that stuff, these are high. So I just want to be 100%. I never want to say something which is not accurate, just to make an impression. And you'll see this also when it comes to objectivism, that I don't want to create a story which is more exciting or impressive than it actually was. But anyway, this was a great lesson, because after the Presidential Guard, life was, let's say, on easy mode, right? And after the Presidential Guard, I go to the UK and start my PhD. And this is the time where Greece is on crisis. The financial crisis happens in Greece. So the timing is perfect. And I'm sure this is something that also you can relate to, that if you've gone through a difficult environment, then life is more on an easy mode after. So, the PhD experience where I had to work all sorts of different jobs. At some point, I had something like, I think 13, part-time jobs. For me, it was very easy. I never experienced, people say, oh, PhD, if you don't have enough money, it's not easy. It was very easy, because if your point of reference was, particularly the first months, the Presidential Guard, after that, everything was easy. So I go to the UK, I study and I work. The more I work, the prouder I feel. And to cut the long story short, slowly, I see that my worldview is not in accordance with the character that I was building and the person I was. So I was someone who now I appreciated hard work. I appreciated achievement. I actually appreciated people building nice stuff, impressive things, from sports to literally architecture. So at some point I realized I'm on the wrong bus. I'm on the wrong train. The left is not the vehicle to take me to where I want to go. But life is funny in that some ways. This was also the time that I returned to Marx and I take it more seriously. So I'm like, okay, the left today is a joke. What is the answer? Let's go back to the OGs. Let's go back to Marx himself, because that's where the answer will be, right? It can't be that the left is wrong. So since I see that what I consider as the left is BS, let's go back to the answer must be somewhere in Marx himself. Of course, turns out the answer was nowhere there to be seen. So that's how slowly I started looking elsewhere. And this is how I came across the Austrian school and how I came across later objectivism.
Now, what were you doing for a living after you got your PhD?
No, during my PhD, already after the first few months, I was a teaching assistant. So I was teaching classes, and I was also working in my Marxist days. I would call them proletarian works, proletarian jobs, and anything that had to do without the university. Again, I was working many part-time jobs. Didn't have their way because the leftists in Europe are against part-time jobs. They consider they are exploitation. So the leftists believe that you should have one 8-hour job and that's it. So luckily they didn't have their way in the UK. So my main job was a teaching assistant, to put it simply, and on the side I was doing other things. I was working at a cinema, I was working at which was also a theater. At some point, I was working more manual labors, various things.
And where were you teaching?
University of Kent. I was in the beautiful beautiful town of Canterbury. I was very lucky on that. It was a very beautiful place.
And what were you teaching? Were you teaching your Marxism or were your Marxist views coming
even
through?
Worse. Mainly, I was teaching environmental social sciences, so environmental stuff. Although already I was very skeptical of environmentalism because my idea was environmentalism is the death of Marxism. Like we are in favor of factories and spaceships and interplanetary communism. So what is this environmentalist stuff? So yeah, we're all against capitalism. Capitalism destroys the environment, but who cares? And when communism comes, we're gonna destroy the environment even more, and then we're gonna move to another planet. That was the plan.
All right. So how do you get introduced to the Austrian School of Economics, and who were the economists that you were first reading?
Okay, most people will not even know what I'm talking about. Back in the day, this was 2013. Today, you consume most of your intellectual content on YouTube. Back in the day, it was in iTunes, and it was such a thing called iTunes University, iTunes Library, something like that. So I literally put anti-environmentalism. This is the equivalent of going to YouTube and putting something like, objectivism, right? And the first person that comes up is a person who I think you've had on your show, and a person with whom, by coincidence, we have birthday, I think, at the same day. Walter Block, and he has a lecture, something like how Austrian free marketeers view environmentalism. And I listened to it. It was like, hey, that's good. And then from iTunes also had something like suggested based on what you just heard. And then I came across, I think it was Tom Woods, and I got hooked mostly on their stuff that was not miles away from the left, like anti-war, in favor of, no regulations, because I was a leftist against regulation, because again, the idea was the furthest capitalist develops, the quickest we're going to get to communism. So yeah, today I wouldn't consider myself in the same team, definitely with these people, but I have to be honest that they played a big role in coming into contact with some different ideas. Then I check a bit of Milton Friedman, a bit of Hayek, and around that time, Ayn Rand also entered my life. So it was this weird trajectory.
Did you ever hear Walter Block's story about how he used to be a socialist and what?
Of course, yeah.
That's awesome.
So that's the other thing. Around that time, the material on libertarianism and Ayn Rand online was relatively limited. So I don't exaggerate when I tell you this. I think in early 2014, I had consumed literally everything that was on iTunes or on YouTube, from Walter Block, from Friedman, whatever Objectivism had out at that point, which was not much. I think even Peikoff's lectures were not out at that point. So yeah, that was the journey. Yes, I've heard Walter Block's stories, George Rishman's stories about Ayn Rand and about Rothbard. So that was at that point, I think I considered myself a libertarian, and at some point, for a short period, also an Austro-libertarian.
So when do you come across and start reading Ayn Rand?
April 2014. And I start with...
Yeah, go ahead.
I know it. Sorry?
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask you where you started, but you were going to tell me.
Yeah, so the reason I remember is if I go to my Amazon page, I can still find the first book I bought, which was The Return of the Primitive. So I was finishing my PhD. My PhD was a criticism of the new left from an old left point of view. So I Googled Ayn Rand. I figured out she had... and how I even heard the name Ayn Rand is a weird story. But anyway, I hear about that person, Ayn Rand. I Google her. I see she has written something on the new left. So I buy The Return of the Primitive, the Anti-Industrial Revolution. I read it. I'm absolutely amazed. I say, okay, this person has said everything I want to say. I don't find a single thing I disagree with her. Then I start reading The Fountainhead. But I see on Wikipedia or something that there is this other book, Atlas Shrugged, which is more political, so to speak. So I put away The Fountainhead before finishing it. I read Atlas Shrugged, and slowly. I love it from the beginning, but initially I think, Ayn Rand maybe was a bit mistaken because it's communism that will give us all these great producers. So I actually, now we're going to give a little... if someone hasn't finished the Atlas Shrugged,
spoiler alert.
So I viewed the strike as a Leninist vanguard, because in a way it is Leninist vanguard. So you have someone going to the productive class and telling them you are literally oppressed. You are oppressed and you don't have class consciousness. This is what Francisco is doing. So I was obsessed with Francisco as a agitator, as a agent of his class. But the end of the book, I think I was convinced that all this greatness is not going to come from the left. So it's time you realize that you have to completely cut all ties in your head, first of all, with the left. And by mid-2014, I think I was a full-fledged free marketeer, however you want to call it, libertarian. That's how I would view myself at that time.
And did you keep reading Ayn Rand?
Oh yes, of course. I kept reading Ayn Rand. I read almost the usual thing that happens at that stage. You read everything, and with no filter mechanism of quality. So every biography that was from the Brandens, actually, I read the Brandens biography before everything else. Anything that was out there from Ayn Rand, whoever who had written it, I read it. Now, the people will say, how, if you did all this, how did you say you were working hard? I don't know. When you get excited with something, it becomes your whole life. So it's in some way took over my life, but in some other way, life went on. And because again, these ideas would never have an appeal on me if I was not a person who was at the side working hard and taking pride from hard work. And I put the bread on the table, and particularly when I could start helping my family back home in Greece, because again, these were the years of Greece was in a serious financial crisis. This gave me a lot of pride. So this created a whole worldview and a whole frame in which all these things fit together quite well.
What was it like for you psychologically, not when your political views start to really change, but your ethical views, to start to experience the idea that the way you'd been living your life was wrong, and now you're going into the new life. Now, once you get to the new place, I know it's like, okay, I can go now, I can handle it. But at first, there's got to be that sort of tension as you're breaking away. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I've never thought of that. So, two instinctive answers come to mind. The first is it was relatively easy because my reaction to everything that Rand said is, yeah, obvious. Like, yeah, that makes sense. How could it be anything else? The other thing is, I hope I don't become too personal. I think in some ways I haven't transitioned fully ethically and morally because it's not. I catch myself very often doing things and thinking, why did I do this thing? Like, did I do this from a like very genuine, okay, this is good for me, or was this a duty to someone? And I still do many things out of duty that often I don't understand why, and I don't want to understand, which is in the party language that's called evasion, because it's not easy, it's difficult. So, particularly when it comes to family, extended family, all that stuff, old acquaintances, it's not easy to say, oh, from today, because I've read this philosophy, I will go full in on that direction, and that's my life now. I wish it was so easy, but it's not.
I cannot tell you how happy I am that you shared that, because I think there's a tendency amongst objectivists, and when you read Ayn Rand, to think, okay, you just come and you have this acceptance, and all of a sudden your emotions are all in line. You no longer have these thoughts. You're just this egoistic hero, the face of no pain and guilt, as in, John Galt. But the reality is, when you have a lifetime of screwed up premises, mixed up values, irrational things you've been doing, that stuff doesn't just go away because you've come to a different intellectual conclusion. I've struggled with it a lot myself, going from being a criminal to being an objectivist. Even today, when somebody will get smart with me online, I get that, you know what I mean? Like, who do you think you're talking to? Now, once I realize it, I'm able to say, no, that's irrational. You don't want to go that route, but it still happens. My friend Brent, one time in prison, they had given him stuff in his commissary bag that he was not supposed to have. So he went to the supervisor. He said, hey, listen, I was given this stuff. I'm not supposed to have it. And the commissary guy looked at him like, what are you, crazy? Why not just take the free stuff? And Brent got this sort of like, like guilty feeling, like, why didn't I just do that? Because those values don't just disappear. And I personally think it's important for people that have become objectivists to share that kind of stuff, because otherwise we give the impression to somebody just coming along that, oh, you're just a failure. Why aren't you, Hank Rearden or John Galt already? You know what I mean? So
it's funny how you mentioned Hank Rearden. If Hank Rearden in the novel, so if Ayn Rand actually wants to make the point that, hey, this is very difficult, the whole novel in a way is the journey of Rearden. If it's difficult for the fictional hero who deliberately comes out of the mind of the person who comes up with this moral theory, then yeah, obviously it's going to be difficult for all of us, and to different degrees. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing. I cannot give you an answer. Oh, now I've reached the point, and looking back, this is what happened, because I'm still on the way. I'm still on the journey.
Another thing that tripped me up, and I find trips others up, and I actually talked to Don Watkins when I interviewed him about this, is even when we adopt the new moral view, the religious type of morality for me was still there. In other words, it's not adopt my values in accordance with what's best for my life. It's adopt my values in accordance with what's consistent with morality. So morality is like I was still thinking of it like a set of commands. Thou shalt be self-interested. Did you struggle with any of that dynamic?
I'm not sure, because I was never very religious, but in some ways there are religious elements of duty in my mind. So the way that this would manifest in me was me giving strong opinions about topics that I couldn't tell you why I think this. So, for example, I don't know, something, just an example, right? Anarcho-capitalism is a contradiction in terms. Why? Because. Yeah, and still today, there are some topics that out of honesty with myself and with my employer, I wouldn't go out there and debate with people, because they're topics that I haven't given the time to study to the point where I can say, I can tell you why this is wrong or why this is good or bad. And I think this is perfectly okay, because life is short and my intellectual interests are on a different area. So if I cannot prove to you why the theory of concept is incompatible with quantum whatever, then I'm okay with that. I don't particularly worry.
It's funny. That's an example I often give. Like, I know next to nothing about quantum mechanics. I mean, I've read a little bit. I could verbally state a lot of it.
Exactly.
But I don't really know. I don't know the math, for instance, that you need to understand. And I'm okay with that. I think it becomes a problem when people pretend that they do. And, like, I've been in debates and somebody will ask me a question and I'll say, well, I never thought about that. So I don't know. I'm not prepared to give an answer. And people say to me, oh my God, you didn't give an answer. Well, what do you want me to do? Just make it up? Like, I haven't thought about every possible ethical scenario that could ever possibly confront me. So I don't have a ready-made answer immediately. And I'm okay with that.
I want to say two things on that. First is I appreciate how in your online presence, particularly your Twitter, which I follow, quite often I get the vibe from you that you're someone who tries to figure things out. Like, that's why, you discuss with people.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. The other is my favorite Yaron Brook story. So last year we were in Australia and for a conference, and there was like one of these open Q&A, like ask me anything. And it was me and Yaron. So a student from the audience asked a question which was so complicated I can't even, but something like, how does the theory of infinity of the universe relate to the objectivity of concept, something like that. And Yaron says, I don't know, I don't care, but good for you that you care, but that's not for me. And I really appreciated that answer. Right? I don't know, I don't care. I understand why this is important for you. It should be important for you, but that's just not for me. So, yeah.
So when did you first get involved with, I don't know what the word I want to use, maybe official. I don't have a better word. I understand there's no official objectivism, but maybe put it this way, objectivist organizations.
The movement. So the first time I was involved in the UK with a group of people who were also former leftists, who are behind the festival, which is the Battle of Ideas, and the magazine Spiked. People like Frank Furedi, Claire Fox, Brennan O'Neill. Anyway, and they have this big festival of debates, and I see that in one panel, there's Yaron Brook. And I was very new in Objectivism. So I go to the organizer and say, put me on that panel. We could have a whole episode telling you how I was mentally preparing for that. And because, I had a big intellectual crush on Yaron. So I was playing scenarios in my mind. What am I going to say? I'm going... Anyway, the day comes and there were two Greeks in the audience, and they see that there's going to be someone who's a Greek guy, and he's a professor, a lecturer in sociology. So they're sure he's going to be a leftist. But, I do my thing in the panel. Obviously, also myself and Yaron, we defended Ayn Rand. So then these guys come to me. They tell me, hey, we liked what you said. Let's be basically friends. And we got some funding by what back then was called the Prometheus Foundation. No, the Objectivist Venture Fund, I think it was called back then. I think later it became the Prometheus Foundation. So we got some funding to translate to Greek the virtue of selfishness. But most importantly, we organized a big conference in Greece. And Tara Smith shows up, Andrew Bernstein. What an experience hanging out with Andrew Bernstein in Greece. That was a memorable days. And Greg Salmieri. So most important from that is that particularly Greg and Tara, we built a good relationship. Later they both became my mentors, and through them I get into contact with the Ayn Rand Institute. I already knew that I wanted to work with them, so it was a dream for me. So that's how slowly I get into the funnels, to use the corporate language of the Ayn Rand Institute, first as a student, then I work for them, and then I work for them full-time.
And what about, when did you meet Razi?
1 or 2 years after that. So I meet Razi again in a battle of ideas in London. Initially, we don't like each other. So, or maybe Razi he definitely remembers the story. So he was building then what later became Ayn Rand Center UK. So Razi has a way to persuade you on stuff. So he wanted to make me something like a trustee, because that's what the charity needs. And, I just had my first full-time job in academia. I was like, I was not very courageous. But mostly I was like, who am I to become a trustee? So I say no. And then he calls me and he says, so your answer is no, but actually this doesn't capture it. He does it the Razi way, and basically he guilts me into it. So this was the beginning. Of a beautiful friendship, to use the closing lines of Casablanca. We reached at some point where I think we were speaking every single day on the phone, particularly around the time of the pandemic. Our relationship was always a bit turbulent, but there's no question he's the reason I think I went... one of the main reasons I went full-time in the objectivist movement. If it weren't for the Ayn Rand Center UK, I don't think I would eventually have left academia and go full-time into objectivism. So, credit where credit is due.
And what do you do at ARI?
I do 3 things at ARI. Number 1, I create content for them, to put it simply. Most importantly, I teach in their online educational courses. And number 3, I do what we could call outreach for them. So I speak to student groups, to conferences in Europe and elsewhere. So these are the three things. But for the 3, the most important for me is getting more expertise in topics that are important and trying to teach them and try to become an expert on them. Not an expert in a way, an academic way, but understanding them deeply, so that then we can have a good ammunition in fighting these bad ideas.
Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Not just, I mean, not just in terms of where you're going to work and where you're going to live. I mean, where do you see Nikos as a human being on your journey? Where are you in 5 years?
Okay, that's a good question, because professionally, I will tell you this, and hopefully, it doesn't sound pompous. If I haven't made some significant impact in the culture as an intellectual, I will consider it that these 5 years have been a failure. So I want to be at the level of someone who persuades many people. So it's not about the size of the audience, but the quality of the audience, that persuades many good people, that basically, if you care about reason and if you care about living a good life and not living in a crazy world, then both the left and the right is not for you. So that's that's my main target. That I want to have an impact, to leave a dent. Unfortunately, I can't quantify it, and if you can't quantify it, it's not a very good sign. But that's the biggest goal when it comes to professionally. And otherwise, I would say it builds around that, but also trying to do other things that I consider important in a good, virtuous life. Things around, health, being in good shape, and things like that. So building an overall personality, because again, till my 30s, I didn't do anything which I consider very important for the person I now wanted to be. So I also need to catch up with the lost time, with the wasted time.
So from talking to you right now, I'm going to give you my unsolicited advice. I would like to see Nikos become more comfortable with self-praise. Because every time you've given yourself credit, you say, I don't want to sound pompous. I don't want to be like I'm bragging. You are working hard. You're intellectually honest, and you've come a hell of a long way. Those are things to be proud of, and it's okay to be proud of yourself and to say so.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. But we have, work to do. We have work to do.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. You know what I try to do and it always helps me to keep grounded. If ever I feel myself getting too ahead of my skis and too high on myself, I think of how far I've got to go. But whenever I feel myself feeling down, like I'm not accomplishing stuff, I look at how far I've come. And I find that is a strategy, helps to keep me eyes forward.
That's a very good way to put it. Then again, I'm sure you can also relate to, and actually I want to ask you how you deal with this notion of wasted time, right? Like you feel you wasted time in a different way from me, but I think we both share that. So how do you make up for this time?
So up until, the problem is most of the wasted time in my life was as a kid. Once I was in prison, after a couple of years, even while I was still doing drugs and things I shouldn't, I was already reading.
Okay.
And I don't, like when people will say to me, for instance, if you could go back and change one thing, what would you change? And my answer is usually nothing, because everything that's happened and everything I've done is who I am now. So even if I go and you were to say, isolate a particular crime that I committed, right? And you say, well, there were victims in that crime. Wouldn't you want to take that back? Okay. So let's say I go back and you look at the crime that led me into prison, the main one, and I undo that, but everything else is the same. Well, then I'm going to go victimize somebody else. And I'm going to end up in prison anyways. And it's also a fool's game to play. What would I do different? Because I can't do different. What I can do is go forward from right now. I can learn from everything I've done and everything I experienced in the past, and I can apply it to now, but I can't change it. So why not just use it as a learning experience instead of focusing on what I can't change, and just make better decisions in the future? So 10 years from now, I'm not looking back at today saying, oh man, what could I have done differently then?
That's a very good way to put it. No question about that. Yeah. And also, we can't change anything. What we can't change, which is basically saying the same thing as you said, is 5 years from now, not looking back and saying, I wish I could have done that other thing.
Yes. All right, Nico. So what's something, or if there is anything, what would you like to say about your life that I didn't ask or I didn't get to in this discussion?
No, you asked questions that are very different from what I usually. So the usual question is something like, which is why I told you that I don't want to bullshit people with, there's this moment that I read Atlas Shrugged, and I was like, and I threw it away because there was no such moment. So I think the questions you asked were quite spot on. So the question I think we should discuss, and I don't have an answer, and I'm curious what you think or what the audience feel, and they can tell us, is why isn't objectivism bigger out there? That's the thing that annoys me. And there are two possible answers. The one answer is, there's something with the philosophy, and the culture out there is not ready for such a radical philosophy. I don't like that. I'm not buying that. I mean, if the Stoics have persuaded people to take cold showers and do cold plunge, which somehow also been persuaded to do, then there's no difficult feat that we cannot do. So this means that we, the objectivist movement, we are missing something. We are not good enough in something. So, and obviously I don't have an answer, and I'm sure you don't have an answer right now, because if we had the answer, we would do it ourselves just like that. But that's, for me, a discussion that needs to be ongoing between people like ourselves. Why are we, it's not just that we are not winning, but why, for example, Stoicism is so much more influential out there among good people, among ambitious people. So that's what is bugging me. And again, this is not, why didn't you ask me this question? Because even if you ask me, I don't have the answer. But this is something that is bothering me a lot. And this is something that I try to figure out.
Okay. I'm going to give a brief answer, but I'm also going to say this. I'm going to give you an invite right now to come back on the show and have a discussion about this, because I think it deserves its own episode. But sure. The hint I will give is, one, objectivism is only a little over 50 years old. And it's a complete philosophy that's very complex. Stoicism has 2,000 years on objectivism, right? If Zeno of Elea, when did he write? You may have a better idea of this than what I do.
Yeah, that's true. But notice the comeback and the peak it experienced in the last 20 years, basically with the work of one person, Ryan Holiday. So
yes, and I would suggest talking to Aaron Smith from the Ayn Rand Institute, because I interviewed him on Stoicism.
Oh, I know.
And Ryan Holiday is not putting out the version of Stoicism that was put out by Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, or Zeno of not Zeno of Elea, Zeno the Stoic. I'm confusing them. Zeno Elea is the guy with the arrow. Zeno the Stoic is the one that I'm thinking of. So that's part of an answer. But I would love to have you back on to have a full discussion about that, because I think it's an important topic.
Yep, 100%.
All right, Nikos, where can people find you?
Okay. First, my main habitat is Twitter. I try to be active there. The second most obvious is the channels of the Ayn Rand Institute. I have also my own YouTube channel. I try to be consistent lately, and apparently people are responding to it, so I'm quite glad. I try to have a bit more of a personal voice there. I try also Substack every now and then, although writing is not really my thing. So if you go to Twitter, and there I have the links. Twitter and YouTube, I would say, just the name that you see there. The name on Twitter is Nikos _ or how this thing is called, the 17. Yes, the 17 is from the Bolshevik Revolution, because I made my Twitter when I still was a Marxist. So Nikos how it's called, 17. That's me on Twitter.
Why didn't you have it for October? Why 17? Why not October?
Well, because 17 is more, and actually, with the old diary, the day I think of the storming of the Winter Palace, which by the way is a myth, there was never a storming, there was just a walking in. I think it was the 17th, so that number was
double. All right,
yeah,
all
double.
right,
Yeah.
all right. Nikos, thank you so much for coming on. It's a great discussion.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.